Hi there, this is my list of my favourite top 10 nautical novels. The reason I'm doing this is I was looking on the internet recently and I'm looking at some science fiction stuff, and down the side I saw top 10 science fiction novels. Must read. Looked at that. That led me into a whole list of top 10 fiction novels, top 10 all this kind of fantasy novels. Science fiction and fantasy seem to dominate, and all these gorgeous young Americans having these very intelligent conversations about science fiction novels. And I thought, that's interesting. I'll go and look and see what the maritime lists are like. And I looked and I looked and I couldn't find any. Not too long after, I found myself looking at all these hairy owl fellas in the UK talking about their top 20 1970s rock albums and things like that, and sitting in their living room chatting away. So I thought, I'll have a go myself. Here we are. This, like I said, is my top 10 personal favourites. It's not meant to be the definitive top 10 nautical novels. For example, I don't have Moby Dick. Now, Moby Dick is regarded by many as the great American novel, but it's hard work. It's hard work. Worth a read when you have the time. But I didn't really enjoy it. Some of the books, I've got 3 books here that didn't make it, 3 also rans. One of them, Joseph Conrad, The Rescue. Now, you know Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, very well known. The Rescue, set in Malaysia, about a European who has been living there for many years, has his own vessel, potting around the islands, encounters a situation where natives that he knows are involved in a hostage situation with some Europeans, and he tries to intercede, and he's got conflicting loyalties there, and there's a woman on board, a wife of one of the Europeans he kind of falls for, and it's a good story. It's kind of flawed, that's why it's not in the top 10, but I've read it twice. I enjoyed it. I think it would make a cracking movie if somebody could turn it into a good script. That's Joseph Conrad, The Rescue. Star of the Sea. Now, I enjoy Joseph O'Connor's writing, and his newspaper columns were always very amusing. This novel, it's set on a ship, but there's an awful lot of backstory for all the characters, so it doesn't really count, I suppose, as a nautical novel, because so much of the stuff takes place on land. It's set among peasants and nobility on an Irish famine era emigrant ship heading to the US, and it's all to do with the history, basically, the peasants and the aristocrats, and there's an assassin on board, which isn't really giving anything away by saying that. I was reluctant to read this because of the cliched nature of the storyline. We've seen it so many times before. Far and Away, that movie with Tom Cruise. Stuck in a caravan park one rainy day, nothing else to read. Picked it up, couldn't put it down. Really well written. It's like you reinvented the whole thing. It was really fresh. Very impressed. I think Richard and Judy even picked it as one of their books to read for their book club thing. Part of a series. The next one didn't impress me, but this one was a great read. Not really a nautical book, but set on a ship. Martin Eden. Any Tom Waits fans out there might be aware of the song, probably are aware of the song Shiver Me Timbers. Great song, I love it. It refers to Martin Eden as a character, and I looked up to see what that was, and it comes from this book by Jack London, who will feature later in the list. Martin Eden is a book about a sailor, but it's set ashore in San Francisco. He's an uneducated sailor, but he's intelligent. He feels he has a gift for storytelling, so he tries to make it as a writer ashore in San Francisco in the 1800s, partly to impress a girl, partly to make a better life for himself, and because he feels this need to write. Maybe partially autobiographical. That's Martin Eden is actually, that picture is actually Jack London himself, who was a sailor, and as I said, he'll pop up later in the list. There's some also rans. So now, onto the list. My favourite top 10 nautical novels. Number 10. Number 10 is a book from 1882. Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island. Treasure Island was the book that really set the format for a lot of novels afterwards. You had a young boy in a domestic environment. Um, Along comes a stranger from outside, introduces them to this whole world of adventure. They go off on a quest, and he comes back home. It's a coming of age book. It's also basically the story that started off this idea of pirates with buried treasure, with one leg and a parrot. All the cliches we have of pirates, including the accent, all stem from this. They cast Robert Newton in 1950 in the Disney movie, and he spoke with this British West Country accent, and ever since that's how people have regarded all pirates to speak. If you don't know it, it's well worth knowing this story. Number 10. Number 9. Storm Warning by Jack Higgins. Jack Higgins, you'd know from The Eagle Has Landed. He wrote that novel, and Storm Warning is basically about a German square rig ship down in Brazil, 1944. The crew and the captain want to get back to their families in Germany because everything's going pretty badly for the Germans at that point, and they take on board some passengers reluctantly, including some nuns, and they struggle to get back across the Atlantic to Germany. There's another element of the story involving Britain and involving an American officer, naval officer, captured U-boat ace, and also an old Scottish lifeboat man on an island up off Scotland, and all these various strands come together. It's not high literature or anything, but it's a great read, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. More, not so much a thriller as some of the other books, more just a sea story. That's number 9, Jack Higgins, Storm Warning. Number 8, With Blood and Iron by Douglas Reman. I actually was going to choose another Douglas Reman book called Rendezvous South Atlantic, which is about a ship called HMS Benbecula and a captain who has to whip her into shape and take her to sea in the Arctic, in the South Atlantic. Couldn't actually find it, so I picked this one because could have been my other choice. This one is about a German U-boat captain and his crew. As the war turns against them, the happy time is over. Things are getting tough and they're getting disillusioned, as you can imagine. It's an unusual look at the other side for Douglas Reman, who mainly writes about Royal Naval stuff and all different aspects of the Royal Navy, everything from Fleet Air Arm to motor torpedo boats. He's written a hell of a lot of novels, and this is really to represent him and his work, because I've read a lot, and you know, if you like naval stuff, you'd like it. And it's not high art, but it's good stuff. And he knows what he's talking about. Douglas Reman went to sea at 16. He served through the war. He was wounded a couple of times. He was basically, he knows what he's talking about. And he also writes as Alexander Kent. Now, I don't have Alexander Kent on this list. I've never actually read anything by Alexander Kent, which I know is a big omission. But Douglas Reman stuff I do like. So Douglas Reman, number 8. Number 7. Number 7 is The Sand Pebbles. Now, you're probably familiar with a movie called The Sand Pebbles, maybe you're not, which stars Steve McQueen as a laconic US sailor. Well, Steve McQueen is going to be laconic on a Chinese riverboat, gunboat. This is the novel on which that is based, and like many novels, I suppose, it's kind of been overshadowed by the fact that it was filmed, and now people will remember it as a film, this story. But in actual fact, the novel dates from 1962. Richard McKenna, he was US Navy. He's in the Navy for 20 years and finished up as a chief machinist's mate, and spent time on the Chinese riverboat as part of his 20-year career in the US Navy. And basically, it's a story of changing times for the Chinese and this American riverboat stuck in the middle of it. The main character is Jake Holman, in charge of the engines. On board are all these Chinese coolies. He's a little more sympathetic to them than the rest of the crew. China is changing. China is becoming more modern, and the way people are reacting, the Chinese reacting to foreigners is changing. There's some missionaries involved that they have to rescue. It's a good yarn. James Michener says on the back, a torrent of incident, adventure, outrage and sex. Brilliantly told. Can't go wrong with that, can you? The Sand Pebbles by Richard McKenna. Number 6 is The Sea Wolf by Jack London. I told you he'd come up again. Jack London was a sailor. He went to sea, came back and had a good career writing novels. You know him from The White Fang, Call of the Wild, that kind of thing. Writing about the Yukon and all that, but he wrote a lot of maritime stuff as well. The Sea Wolf, I think, is a great story. I much prefer to read this than Moby Dick. It involves a young man, an intelligent, educated young man who falls overboard when there's a ferry collision in San Francisco Harbour, picked up by an outward bound sealing vessel commanded by Captain Wolf Larsen, the Sea Wolf of the title. The ship's called the Ghost, and he expects to be brought back to land, but no, they're not stopping for anything. They're heading out, and he is put to work as the scullion, and eventually works over the months, works his way up through the crew, becomes almost I think he ends up the mate, and but there's a battle of wills all the time between him and the captain. The captain likes having him on board. The captain is an intelligent man, but not well educated, but fairly well read, and the two of them have kind of a battle of wills that is exacerbated when they pick up some survivors who include a woman, and that adds a bit of salt to the whole thing. Good novel. The Sea Wolf, that's number 6. Jack London. Number 5, HMS Ulysses, Alistair MacLean. Now, Alistair MacLean, he served in the Navy through World War II. He was on HMS Royalist doing Arctic convoys, ended up in the Mediterranean later. So we saw quite a bit of it. He ended up in the Far East then afterwards. So we saw quite a bit of the war. This book, it was his first ever novel. Now, if he hadn't gone on to write things like The Guns of Navarone and thrillers like that, which he began to churn out later in life, sort of sub James Bond kind of stuff, if he'd just written this book and then been hit by a bus, this would be regarded as one of the great war novels. But I think it maybe his prestige was diluted a bit by later novels. It's basically a look at a ship, Arctic convoys, the various people involved, the various dilemmas they face, the horrors they face. It's a great read. HMS Ulysses, Alistair MacLean. That was number 5. Number 4. Now, number 4 is called Gone to Sea in a Bucket by David Black. It's about a young lad called Harry Gilmore. It's the start of a series of Harry Gilmore books, and the bucket refers to HMS Trebuchet that he ends up in. It's about a young lad who starts off in the surface fleet and soon transfers to boats, submarines. I saw this book on Amazon by accident. I happened to notice a lot of 5-star reviews, so I checked out some of them, discovered a lot of 5-star reviews from ex-submariners, which that impressed me, so that's why I got it. And I have to say I was very impressed. It's very immersive. The writer knows what he's talking about. You just trust it, like a Patrick O'Brien novel. You just go along with it and you trust everything he's telling you about the way things were done, and you care about the characters, and you care if people die. It's very good. Great read. Gone to Sea in a Bucket. David Black, a Harry Gilmore novel, first of a series. I've read the next 2 and they're pretty good as well, and there's another one or 2 come out since, I believe. That was number 4. Number 3 is a book called English Passengers, Matthew Neal, from 2000. I actually listened to this as an audiobook, and it's one of the best audiobooks I've listened to because it's done with a company of actors who are fantastic. The story is told a bit like the Dracula novel. Each chapter is through a different viewpoint that rotates around, and incredible characters. Basically, it's a voyage to the other side of the world, involving Manx roguish smugglers who pick up an expedition that's outward bound to Tasmania, Van Diemen's Land, where a vicar has become convinced, leading the expedition. This vicar has convinced himself that the earthly site of the Garden of Eden is in Tasmania, based on reports he's heard from the exploration of Tasmania. These roguish Manx guys basically take advantage of this expedition and end up taking them to Tasmania. It's humorous, it's heartbreaking, because another part of the story deals with a Tasmanian native who is basically coming of age, and things are pretty harsh for the Aborigines in Tasmania, and they get harsher as the story goes on, and the whole thing comes to a sort of a climax when all these strands come together. Very well told, very well written, very amusing at times. Great story. English Passengers, Matthew Neal. Number 3. Number 2. Patrick O'Brian. You're probably asking yourself now, what's number 1 if this is number 2? Well, Patrick O'Brian, Master and Commander, really it represents his body of work, I suppose, because, as you know, Patrick O'Brian stands head and shoulders above the rest when it comes to historical fiction, historical nautical fiction. It's high quality, credible in historical detail. A lot of it is based on real events, of course. Captain Cochrane and people like that inspired it. But his knowledge, his use of language, his characters are all fantastic. You know, you don't need me to tell you, I'm sure. Patrick O'Brian, Master and Commander. Number 2. What's number 1? Number 1. This Thing of Darkness by Harry Thompson. Now, this was longlisted for the Booker Prize. It was published in 2005, just a few months before Harry Thompson died. It was his first novel. He then died of cancer, which is a shame, because God knows what else he might have brought forth. It's a fantastic book. It's basically a fictionalized account of the relationship between Darwin and Fitzroy on the voyage of the Beagle and beyond. I suppose, in fairness, I should have worked out how much of the book takes place on the voyage, because it does follow them later in life. But the voyage is the key, and actually before Darwin joins the earlier voyage Fitzroy had with the Beagle, is part of it too. I suppose it's as much about Fitzroy as Darwin, more so maybe than Darwin, but it follows them both afterwards. It's an adventure story, it's a travelogue, it's a historical account of those times. It deals with some fascinating things that I thought he must be making up, but when I looked at the real facts, no, they were true. The previous voyage to the one with Darwin, Fitzroy had collected a few they were natives of Tierra del Fuego, very debased people, I suppose they thought of them at the time. They were very crude, barely eking out a life in a harsh environment. They weren't like noble savages of Polynesia or anything. These people were barely surviving. They brought a handful of them back to Britain, taught them manners, taught them English, taught them God, sent them back, brought them back along with Darwin and a Scottish minister to set up a ministry back in Tierra del Fuego. Didn't work out too well. It's a great story, great characters, and hints of Patrick O'Brian and look it up. I'd say if you're the kind of person that came to this list, you're going to love this book. Look it up for yourselves. I can't recommend it enough. It's the kind of book, when you're finished, you're sad because it's finished, and you just want to hand out copies to all your friends. My wife read it, she had the exact same reaction. She said, I feel really bad that it's ended. You care about the people involved as well. Very well written. This Thing of Darkness, you should read it. Can't say enough about it. Harry Thompson. Thanks for watching. I don't know will I do any more of these. I wouldn't bother subscribing if I was you, because I might not, but we'll see how it goes. Thanks. See ya. A little postscript. The book I'm reading at the moment is probably going to nudge something off that list. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. Sterling Hayden. He's the actor. You might remember him from Dr. Strangelove, or he played the police chief in The Godfather, the guy who was assassinated by Michael Corleone in the cafe. Sterling Hayden went to see at 16. Later was talent spotted by somebody from Hollywood who gave him a break in the movies. He always regarded his movie career as a way to fund his later sailing, and he eventually ran away from Hollywood back to sea, and from his marriage at the same time, I think. Lived quite a life. It's well worth checking out his life story. He's got an autobiography. It's on the way to me at the moment, called Wanderer. During World War II, he enlisted, broke his ankle or something in training, re-enlisted under a different name, ended up in special operations in Yugoslavia, working with partisans. Quite a character, Sterling Hayden. And this is his only novel, Voyage, set in 1896, about a square rigger going from New York City to San Francisco around the Horn. Motley collection of characters, pretty grim, gritty stuff at times, but an epic tale of a voyage. So I like it at the moment. I might edge something off that list. Okay, all the best now. Mind yourselves.